really big love for gaming, especially when it comes to brain games, and especially when it has to do with words. And I know you're probably thinking, what on earth does this little tidbit of information of you have to do with what God has to say today? And it's just amazing to me how God is everywhere. You know, we say it all the time that God is omnipresent, omnipotent, omnipowerful, but sometimes he's there and we just don't see him. So me doing something as mundane as finding a new game that I like, that for some reason the name's escaping me, but that's not important. What the game is there are these clues, like crossword clues, but when you type in the answer, each letter has a number underneath, and it goes to this phrase, and it builds it up top. And when you complete the phrase, then you get a fact, a random fact that has to do with the phrase that you just typed out. And there's different categories like bizarre facts, inventions, space, pretty much anything you can think of. And as I was playing one night when I couldn't sleep, I came across these interesting facts that actually God used to inspire my message. One was, I learned that John W. Hames, an architect from Wisconsin, is who we should thank for the in-sink garbage disposal, which makes tossing out scraps of food so much easier. An article in Smithsonian Magazine says Hames got the idea after watching his wife spend time wrapping food in a newspaper and throwing it out. To make her work easier, Hames created and patented the in-sink aerator in 1935. Then I learned that English food manufacturer and chemist Alfred Bird changed the face of baking forever when he created custard powder and the earliest form of baking soda. According to the Oxford Companion to Food, he invented them for his wife, Elizabeth, who was allergic to yeast and eggs, so she too could enjoy delicious baked goods. Then I learned about Josephine Knight Dickinson. She's from New Jersey, and she kept cutting herself while cooking for her and her family in the 1920s. Her husband, Earl Dickinson, stepped in. Dickinson, a cotton buyer for Johnson & Johnson, according to the company's website, decided to invent a temporary adhesive bandage for his wife. His creation became the Band-Aid that we all know and use today. And then there was William Stewart Halsted, MD. He was a renowned surgeon who is often called the father of modern surgery. Known for his strict adherence to sterile working conditions, Halsted invented a rubber glove that allowed surgeons to lessen the transfer of germs during their work. Yet the origin of why he created them is a lot more romantic than you would think. Halsted's wife, Caroline, was a nurse who suffered from dermatitis during her work. According to the Washington Post, Halsted invented the gloves especially for her and gave them to her as a gift after their marriage. Now, yes, there is the common theme of all these inventions were for these inventors' wives. But I'm going beyond that, because as I was doing this and reading them, because these were one right after the other, I was just awestruck how there were all of these problems that there were no solution for, and people were just accepting that it is what it is. But these men saw their loved ones, their beloved, in pain and suffering. They're like, well, there's gotta be a solution somewhere. And they worked until they found it out of love, and it subsequently helped countless people in every situation. In Isaiah chapter 43, verses 16 to 21, it says, I am the Lord who opened a way through the waters, making a dry path through the sea. I called forth the mighty army of Egypt with all its chariots and horses. I drew them beneath the waves, and they drowned, their lives snuffed out like a smoldering candle wick. But forget all that. It is nothing compared to what I am going to do, for I'm about to do something new. See, I've already begun it. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland. The wild animals in the fields will thank me, the jackals and owls too, for giving them water in the desert. Yes, I will make rivers in the dry wasteland so my chosen people can be refreshed. I have made Israel for myself, and they will someday honor me before the whole world. God will always make a way. As I say probably every sermon, and you might get tired of hearing it, but it doesn't make it any less true, that way is not always what we want, what we pictured, what we thought our end goal would be, and we spend so much time fighting it, ignoring it, and trying to make our own way, and then we end up making things worse, or we end up just being so much more disconnected spiritually, which the rest of our being suffers when we are disconnected from Christ once we have been connected to him. He will make a way. And to further back up Isaiah's Exodus chapter 3, what it was referencing, it says, one day Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it did not burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go to see it. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses. Here I am, Moses replied. Do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. When Moses heard this, he covered his face, because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land. It is a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites now live. Look, the cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people Israel out of Egypt. But Moses protested to God. Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt? And God answered, I will be with you, and this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain. But Moses protested, if I go to the people of Israel and tell them, the God of your ancestors has sent me, they will ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell him? God replied to Moses, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, my name to remember for all generations. Now go and call together all the elders of Israel and talk to them. Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, has appeared to me. He told me, I have been watching closely, and I see how the Egyptians are treating you. I promise to rescue you from your oppression in Egypt. I will lead you to a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders will accept your message. Then you must go to the king of Egypt and tell him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So please let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our king. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand forces him. So I will raise my hand and strike the Egyptians, performing all kinds of miracles among them. Then at last he will let you go, and I will cause the Egyptians to look favorably on you. They will give you gifts when you go, so you will not leave empty-handed. Every Israelite woman will ask for articles of silver and gold and fine clothing from her Egyptian neighbors and from the foreign women in their houses. You will dress your sons and daughters with these, stripping the Egyptians of their wealth. Now imagine, if you will, you're an Israelite at this time, and your entire people have been in captivity under Egypt for almost 400 years. Can you imagine that? Can you put yourself in that place and then hear this guy say, oh, the time has come? I'm going to be honest, I don't know if I believe him, because I would be like, I'm at the point where it is what it is. This is all I've ever known. This is all my mom, dad, and their parents, and so on and so forth has known. Very funny. Nice try. It was impossible, I'm sure, for even the strongest of believers. And how many times in our lives have we gone through trials and hardships for so long that when relief finally comes, instead of resting in it and being thankful and following that path, we are at first suspicious and distrusting. Now, I'm not saying we do that every time, but I know we've all done it at least once, where it's like, that's a little too good to be true. This is what I'm used to, and it's bad. I don't know if this is going to work out the way that I think it is. It's just too good to be true. It's impossible. And that is why I believe God hardened the heart of the Pharaoh to show not just the Egyptians who he is and his power, but to prove to the Israelites that I am who I am. Because the plagues, other than the last one, the death of the firstborn, they were all over Egypt. The locusts, the frogs, the death, all of the livestock, all of that, except for Goshen, where the Israelites lived. And that seems like, oh yeah, no big deal. But it's not like Goshen was outside of Egypt. Goshen was in the dead center. So where all around the Israelites' town within this country were experiencing all these horrible things, they were fine. God will make a way. God will try to encourage us that help is on the way, that the breakthrough is coming. And we have a lot of times a tendency to harden our hearts because we're getting too used to the valley and the darkness and the hopelessness. And God is trying desperately to shine his light, and we turn our back. And then in Exodus chapter 14, we find out that indeed the Israelites were let go, and they were given all this wealth from Egypt. And eventually the scales, or whatever you want to call it, lifted from Pharaoh and his officials. And they're like, what have we done letting all these slaves go and giving them our wealth? And they went and they fled after the Israelites. And sure enough, they're like, great, why'd you bring us out of Egypt when they were just going to come right back? And what did God do? He literally made an impossible way through. He had Moses lift up his arms and his staff over the water, and it spread out. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen any movies about this. There are plenty of them. I know the one that used to stick out in my mind was the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, because that's what I grew up watching. But if you've never seen the animated film Prince of Egypt, I encourage you to, specifically for this scene, because it's something that I never thought of before. And as the Israelites are walking, which, by the way, it's not like they were walking on mud, which they should have been, or wet sand. It was dry ground. Their pathway was dry, which was incredible in and of itself. But the way they depict it in this movie is as they're walking through this dry pathway in the middle of the sea, you see all the fish on either side and whales and things. And
including the giant whale shark.
Yes. And they're looking around and they're just going through because these, creatures have also been separated and they're not going through on. There should have been no logical reason that these, fish, these sharks and all, that they just go straight through the water. God made a way. God did the impossible. And then as soon as the Israelites were over on the other side, the waves crashed back over. In fact, it says that further down, it says Then Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the Lord opened up a path through the water with a strong east wind. The wind blew all night, turning the seabed into dry land. So the people of Israel walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground, with walls of water on each side. Then the Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and charioteers, chased them into the middle of the sea. Which I'd like to pause there because it just occurred to me, that's some bravery and some stupidity right there on their part. Because I don't know about you, but if I watched the seas part for the leader of the Israelites and I was coming to do them harm, I would not be following them straight in the middle of the sea.
No, thank you.
Because clearly you do not have God's favor. Like, this isn't normal, but they did not hesitate.
I think in the movie, the Pharaoh stayed behind and everybody else went, and of course they got all drowned, and the Pharaoh then went back home, I think.
It says in the scriptures, then the Egyptians, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and charioteers chased them into the middle of the sea. But just before dawn, the Lord looked down on the Egyptian army from the pillar of fire and cloud, and he threw their forces in total confusion. He twisted their chariot wheels, making their chariots difficult to drive. Let's get out of here, away from these Israelites, the Egyptians shouted. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. When all the Israelites had reached the other side, the Lord said to Moses, raise your hand over the sea again, then the waters will rush back and cover the Egyptians and their chariots and charioteers. So as the sun began to rise, Moses raised his hand over the sea, and the water rushed back into its usual place. The Egyptians tried to escape, but the Lord swept them into the sea. Then the waters returned and covered all the chariots and charioteers, the entire army of Pharaoh. All of the Egyptians who had chased the Israelites into the sea, not a single one survived. But the people of Israel had walked through the middle of the sea on dry ground, as the water stood up like a wall on both sides. It doesn't mention Pharaoh, it just says his entire army. Now, to be fair, and just being honest and transparent, I did not research that particular part to find out if the Pharaoh went back or not, which I could have looked back in history, so I apologize for that. But I imagine if he did, which I have a feeling that he did survive, then that was to go back, and whether people believed it or not, I mean, clearly the army was gone. It was to show God's power and what he is capable of. God makes a way, and we keep putting limits on him. Yes, in Moses' time, just by the raise of his staff, the sea parted and the seabed became dry land on that path. We haven't seen anything like that to that degree, but that does not mean that God is not still making way and doing miracles constantly. We are surrounded by a spiritual battle at all times. It's a whole realm that we cannot see, but we experience it through things that we don't even realize. I mean, every time that we're tempted, that's the enemy's side trying to work against and to get us to slip and fall or to not accept Christ or to stop following him. Anything that goes against God, he is trying to do. Meanwhile, the heavens armies are trying to fight against that, and we are caught in the middle. But God makes a way. There is someone, they asked me not to use their name, but they didn't mind me using their testimony that I spoke with, how this person had a really bad porn addiction and they used it on their phone, and they ended up getting convicted and repenting, and by a message that they had gone to at their church that the preacher did, and they were fine for a while. Like, okay, God has helped me, I'm cured, whatever you want to be. But unfortunately, as the enemy has a tendency to do, and the pornography has a tendency to do, a lot of times you can't avoid it. There are random pop-ups and things like that on different, innocuous websites that you wouldn't even think of. And it's very easy for stuff like that to pop up. And they started watching again, and then right as they went to hit play, someone called them, and they ignored it. And then someone else texted them, and they ignored it. And then a whole other person, third person, called them, and then it was like the lightning strike in the brain, scales fall off the eyes, like, this is God making a way for me to stop. Because they felt very angry at first, not just at themselves, but at God, because they're like, I thought I was cured of this. See, that's the thing. We are flawed. There are definitely instances of people who have broken different addictions and vices, whether it be porn, alcohol, drugs, whatever the case may be, and they can be fine for the rest of their life. And that's fantastic. Sometimes it comes back around. It could be months. It could be years. It could be, a decade or more, and then it comes back around. That doesn't mean that God's not there. That doesn't mean that you're any less saved than anybody else. And we need to really open our eyes. That's why it's so important to stay connected through God. They're praying on your own time and corporately. They're coming together and corporately worship and listening to the message by spending time in fellowship with your brothers and sisters in Christ, because iron sharpens iron. And doing all these things, because then it'll be a lot easier to see where he's working, to see his blessings, to see that his rescue is coming through, and to be able to let go when that rescue doesn't match up with what's in your head, and just trusting the Lord in blind faith and humility, saying, this isn't what I want, I'm a bit upset about it, but I want out of this valley. I will follow down your path. We need to stop limiting our own growth and our own blessings, because just like all the inventors that I had mentioned, I'm sure there's plenty more, both men and women, who have invented things just for the sake of their love for people that are in their lives, to make their lives easier and safer. That is a reflection, just a weak reflection of the love and the compassion that God has for us. We might be in a situation that we've never been in before, and that we don't even know anybody who's been through that situation before. And it's scary, because how can a way be made? It's impossible. Well, we serve a God who everything and anything is possible in him. Not in us, not in our own power, but through God. And when we turn our back, when we don't take opportunities, and I'm sure everyone's been through that, where, about to fall in temptation and God, has somebody call you or brings a verse to your mind or something. This is God helping to make a way, to make you stronger and to keep you on the path. But if we ignore it and blame God for the decisions that we made, and ignore his love and his compassion, his path, then we are limiting not only our own growth spiritually and our growth as a person, but we are also limiting God's blessings that he wants to give us, that we're asking for, and his way through trials and tribulations to get to the other side. Because that's what God does. He makes a way through the wilderness that we read earlier in Isaiah. It's through. Again, I know I've said this a million times, but it's something we need a reminder of, because when problems happen, like really serious problems, to us personally, because everyone's got a different scale, what might be a big problem to one person is nothing to another. But when we're facing a mountain, we want it to go away. We'll close our eyes, we'll try and make our way, around it, under it, over it, anything to stop from dealing with it. But God is trying to make a pathway through it, to refine you, to change you, to uplift you, to connect you to this other side, so you can praise his name for others to see, there was no way through this mountain, but God made a way. So we can help other people who are just stopped by these proverbial mountains, to help them get through the other side. Because that is our job, to have compassion for our neighbor. And who is our neighbor? It's everyone. It doesn't matter how different they are from you. We are to love people and have compassion, just as God has for us. He does not discriminate, and he does not leave you in the darkness. It is our own despair, which despair can be so overwhelming. If you're in a situation you've ever been in before, if you've experienced any kind of loss or multiple types of loss, I know what I'm talking about, because my family used to be compared, when I was growing, like in my teenagers and early 20s, used to be described as Job. So I definitely know about being in the valley for a while and trying to search for the light. And it felt for years that there would be no steady light. And God is bringing this to my mind right now. It was through those valleys where I had lost my mom to cancer, and my grandma Bartel, and or Willoughby, and my grandma Snedeker. We had friends die. We had a house fire during that period. There were so many big, weird, horrible things. And it was constant. My dad in the hospital with health problems. Same thing with my stepmom. And that's besides the personal battles that we were going through. And it was so hard to see the light. And then eventually, God brought me who ended up being my husband, who I dated previously. And that was such a big light of hope that at first I was like, well, it's nice to have a break, that I didn't realize this was God's way of saying a breakthrough is coming. And then I look back at the times that as a family unit, we drew closer together and prayed, and ended up laughing about all the tragic things to a point, because, we weren't, when it rains, it pours. We were, when it rains, it thunder snows. So, God, no, you're totally fine. I'm glad you remembered that. God will make a way. And I know I've repeated that a lot, but I can't hone that in enough. Because if you have no other hope, no other light in the darkness that you're going through, that is, you can trust on God, because he is the rock on which we stand. He is a solid foundation. He is the great physician. He's the comforter. He's the lover of our souls. He is Adonai, El Shaddai, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He is the one who holds tomorrow. He's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore, and a billion other things. And most of them I probably don't even know yet. But God is there, and he understands. what we go through. He understands our pain, and he never relishes in our pain. He's not standing up there like some parents do when you like disobey or something and get yourself in trouble. He's not up there going, I told you so. He's up there with arms wide open, ready to comfort you and to help you through your pain, to help you work out a way through the sin that just captures you and entraps you, through your addictions, through the betrayals and separations that you go through your loss. Anything you can think of and name, God is not up there waiting to shame or kill us. And everyone looks at conviction like it's judge, jury, and executioner. But God's conviction is not someone walking behind you with a bell crying shame over and over again. God's conviction is to say, hey, you are headed off of a cliff. Let's pull this back and let's work together. I can give you the strength and the courage. Accept me, or if you have, rededicate yourself to me, and we can walk this path together. He won't be behind you. He will be beside you. And even though you might not know what's going to happen, what foundation, no, you will know the foundation when you're walking with God. It's solid, but it might not feel that way. God's paths are straight. They're solid. They are to lead you through the fires of life. Because, also speaking from experience, these things that we go through, whether they're our fault, somebody else's, or just life in general, if we avoid them, they get worse. I know of several people in my life, they've shared this testimony before, where they would have all these issues and then they would go to places that helped with things like that and get all these medications and feel better, and then they get discharged and the prescription runs out and no one refills it, and their problems are there times 20 because they never dealt with the problem to begin with. Now, I'm not speaking against medication for mental health whatsoever, but if there isn't help with that, someone to talk to, faith and God to call upon, we won't know where to go, where our path is. God is there waiting to help, holding out his arms for us, welcoming. And yes, the Spirit does admonish. It says so in his word when we are doing something wrong. But admonishment doesn't mean guilt, overpowering, constant for years and decades. It's enough admonishment to where we can recognize we've done wrong, take responsibility, forgive ourselves, ask God's forgiveness, and then move forward. God doesn't want us to stay stuck in this loveless, hateful, unforgiving cycle until we've suffered enough. There were even monks in history who would literally take a cat of nine tails and whip their own backs to suffer for Christ. And that is not what God intended whatsoever. Suffering for Christ sounds like it would be something like that. It's like all the things we have to deny because the Bible is all about, no, you can't do this, no, you can't do that. That they're missing the point, and we miss the point sometimes about its freedom. Suffering for Christ is when we have the courage to do what he calls us to do, to say what he wants us to say when its time has come, and then for people to not react well to it, whether they ignore you, yell at you, cuss at you, whatever the case may be, or if you're in a country that, or in a place that is, you could get executed or and thrown in jail, tortured, all these things for having a Bible. just having a Bible, not even talking about like preaching or anything like that. That's what he talks about suffering for Christ, is remembering that even though suffering or reproach might come, that we don't have time to ignore God publicly. We can't expect anyone to come to know him and love him and accept him and go on these paths where he wants them to go, that is just going to bless you and help you to become the person you were created to be. We can't expect that to happen unless we share who he is, share what he's done for us, share our testimony. When we see a miracle, when we see a blessing, when we see God do something, not to hesitate. Like, don't just say it in your head. Say it out loud for those to hear, so people might see it and recognize and start their journey to God, or back to God, as the case may be. That is why we need to remain connected to him, because his love for us is never ending. It's unfathomable. And the more that we spend learning about it and basking in it and sharing it, the more our path that he has for us is visible, the brighter our light is going to shine. And the more we will feel God's love, no matter our situation or our mood or emotions with what we've gone through. God will instead, we will feel that love and that peace that goes beyond understanding, and we'll be able to share our pain with him and feel his comfort and his grace and his leading.